CBSE Board, Class 11, History, Chapter 2, Part 34, Audio by Renee Matthew. There was a lot of hard work behind the interpretation of history. People took a lot of care to interpret history. And there were also research that weapons did it. We saw that in the previous audio. And it was carried about by research scholars from Russia, just like how I told you right now. And one particular person who did research was Boris Yakovlevich Vladimitsov. This might have a different Russian pronunciation, but Boris Yakovlevich Vladimitsov, he was the person who carried out the research on the society, culture and language of the Mongols. There were other people such as Vasily Vladimirovich Bartold. He did not quite toe the official line. He did not take the official line of doing the research. There was a time when the Stalinist regime was extreme. They were extreme with nationalism. We saw that in the Russian Revolution, right? In the previous classes. So he was not for that sympathetic and positive assessment. He had a very sympathetic and positive assessment of the career, and he was very sympathetic and also very positive towards their achievements under Genghis Khan and also his successors. So when he had this attitude towards the research, it got him into trouble, especially with the censor board. Okay? So that severely curtailed, it put a stop to the circulation of the work of the scholar because he had this sympathetic and positive kind of attitude which was not expected. And that was only in the 1960s that it was curtailed or stopped for the time being, especially during and after the more liberal Khrushchev era. So around this area, so it was during this particular area after the 1960s that it got published, and that too in 9 volumes. Before that it was curtailed. Nobody accepted it. The writers always faced a lot of problems before they got their works published because everybody will not allow truth to be told, right? So this was his own perspective about the positivity on all that, but it was not received well in the beginning phase. The transcontinental span of the Mongol Empire. That actually meant, what is the meaning of that? Transcontinental span, a very important keyword in this chapter. Okay, transcontinental span, it meant that the sources that were available to the scholars were written in a vast number of languages because this region was prone to many languages. It was interculture, just like the Arab world. A lot of people came and settled here. And the most crucial ones, the most important sources were in Chinese, Mongolian, Persian and Arabic. All these languages gave the sources, and the most vital ones or the most important and dominant ones were in Italian, Latin, French and Russian because they were more authentic, they were more reliable. So more the reliable, the historians will start referring the most reliable ones, okay, the most authentic and factual ones. And most of the time the same text was produced in 2 languages with differing contents. Suppose you have the history of the Mongols, it was produced in 2 contents, 2 languages, and that 2 languages will have differing content. So that was the case. For example, the Mongolian and Chinese versions, there was a narrative which was known as Mongol and Nineveh Tubian. I don't know the pronunciation of this, but it is the secret history of the Mongols. It was a narrative on Genghis Khan that was produced both in Mongol language and Chinese language, but it had quite different. It was quite different from the Italian and Latin versions of Marco Polo's travels to the Mongol court. That did not match actually. Italians and Latin, they also they had a version of the narrative. It was also a narrative on Genghis Khan, but a different title was given on it. It was about a person, Marco Polo's travels to the Mongol court. But there should be something which is matching, right? Because they're talking about the same time. So something should be matching between the 2 works, but it did not match. The Mongolian and Chinese version were totally different from the Italian and Latin versions. So the Mongols actually produced little literature on their own. They did not have their own literature. and they were usually written about by literati, especially from foreign cultural milieu, foreign cultural background. People took interest, they came here, they studied, and then they wrote. So what the historians had to do is to give us all this information. The historians had to often double as philologists. They had to be philologists. They had to be very generous to understand the philosophy behind it, to understand the depth behind it, to pick out the meanings of phrases, to do a kind of research and then produce it for reference for us. Okay, where they had to study the phrases for their closest approximation to Mongol usage. So for them to give an authentic, because when the historians write the books, it will have to have some reliability, right? They cannot write something and give it for the people to refer, for the world to refer. So they had to double check everything. That is the point given here. There were works of scholars like Igor de Racheval's. The work is The Secret History of the Mongols, and Gerhard Dofer. There's another person known as Gerhard Dofer. He wrote on Mongol and Turkic terminologies. These two works, which infiltrated into the Persian language. It was a kind of work which infiltrated. Slowly it had its own influence on the Persian language, which brings about the difficulties involved in studying the history of the Central Asian nomads. It was not at all easy to study the history of the Central Asian nomads or the Mongol culture. So they had to do a lot of filtering process, and this got merged slightly in Persian language. And towards the remaining parts of this chapter, there were a lot of achievements that we can see about Genghis Khan and the Mongols. It is still under scrutiny by the scholars. We cannot say that the whole thing is authentic, because whatever they have sieved, it is like sieving the husk from the grains, the cereals and all that. So whatever we have is still awaiting refinement. It is still awaiting credibility, not refinement but credibility. Okay, so this is the Mongol Empire. Look at the vast empire, how they kind of transferred from, we saw that they transferred from the nomadic culture to the feudal system. So they must have taken a lot of trouble for all this, and the way they expanded also, right? A very big part of the world was under them, the Mongol culture, the Mongol Empire. Now we are going into the introduction of the chapter. Just now, till now, we saw the overview of the chapter, which is very important for you to understand, because if you start just reading it, you will not know what is being covered in the chapter. You will keep on reading and you will find it very boring. So after you understand about the overview, please prepare notes or have boxes in your notes where you can put in what is going to come in the first chapter. You will also know how much you have covered when you do that. Okay, so let's go into the introduction. In the early decades of the 13th century, there were great empires of the Europe and the Asian continents. Okay, Europe and Asia understood the danger which was posed to them by the arrival of the new political power in the steppes of Central Asia, and that was Genghis Khan. He had united the Mongol people. Mongol people came from other parts of the world. We saw that they were nomads. But these people were united by Genghis Khan, and that was not a very easy task. He did that. So people started feeling threatened because of the unity between these people, and it was done by Genghis Khan. The political vision, what was his political vision? How did he succeed in all these things? There are 4 points given on this slide. Now when he started uniting, it went beyond the creation of a confederacy of Mongol tribes in the steppes of Central Asia. It went far beyond just the creation of a confederacy, of a body of Mongol tribes. So he said that he had a mandate. Mandate means some kind of authority, some kind of information from God to rule the world. He wanted to do that. That was his vision. That is why I told you it is beyond the confederacy of Mongol tribes alone. So he said that he got a command from God, from information from God to rule the world. So his own lifetime, when we see the lifetime of Genghis Khan, we can see that he was just unifying and establishing his hold over the Mongol tribes. All his life he was working on the Mongol tribes, though he had all these visions to rule the world. Because it was a very big process. Once you establish your hold on a small part of the world, you need to consolidate it. You can't just say, okay, I've conquered, now let me go and sleep. No, it's not like that. You have to consolidate where the hold is strengthened, where the hold is made firm. So that was what he did over the Mongol tribes. And that led and directed to campaigns into adjoining areas, especially in the North China, Transoxiana, Afghanistan, Eastern Iran and Russian steppe. So all these places got disturbed because it led to so many campaigns. And his descendants, okay, after his reign, after his death, they also traveled further afield, out of their field, to fulfill Genghis Khan's vision, because that was his vision. He told that I have to rule the world. He was not able to do it during his tyranny, during his reign. So his descendants wanted to fulfill the vision of Genghis Khan, and they wanted to create the largest empire the world had ever seen. So it was carried on by his descendants. So in the spirit of Genghis Khan's idols, his grandson's name is Mongke. Okay, he said that he had a vision from his grandfather Genghis Khan, and the grandson warned the French ruler Louis IX. Okay, what did he tell Louis IX, the French ruler? In heaven there is only one eternal sky. On earth there is only one land. Genghis Khan, the son of heaven. So this is actually talking about the rising ruler, the ruler who is the only ruler of the world. He's telling my grandfather is the only son of heaven, the only ruler. He is the eternal power. The whole world should listen to him. When by the power of the eternal heaven, the whole world from the rising of the sun to its setting shall be at one in joy and peace. So when we start ruling the whole world, it will be united by joy and peace. Then it will be made clear that we are going to do, when you have understood the decree of the eternal heaven. So it is as if a message is sent from eternal heaven to actually rule the world. So you have to pay attention to what I'm trying to say. Our country is far away, our mountains are mighty, our sea is vast. Such a powerful line. This was the confidence that he wanted to show the French ruler. He who made easy what was difficult and near what was far off, the eternal heaven knows. So he says that it is with much effort and difficulty that the Mongol tribe or the Mongol empire was expanded. So don't try to test our fortitude. Don't trust our courage. We have been through a lot of difficulties. We have crossed all the mountains of hurdles. We have come this far. And my grandfather is the mightiest ruler. It was a kind of threat, right? They were not just empty threats. That is what is being told in the next paragraph. And in the 1236 to 41 campaigns of Batu, there were a lot of campaigning which was happening around the Mongol Empire. Another grandson of Genghis Khan, what he did was, he devastated Russian lands until Moscow. He went and started devastating, completely destroying the Russian lands. He seized Poland and Hungary and camped outside Vienna. He alone did that, another grandson. So look at how his descendants actually grew, how it expanded, and they tried fulfilling the wish of Genghis Khan. In the 13th century, what happened? It did seem that the eternal sky was on the side of the Mongols. It did seem that this particular proclamation was becoming true, that the eternal sky, the heavens were actually supporting Genghis Khan's vision. It was on their side. And many parts of China, the Middle East and Europe were inhabited and conquered by Genghis Khan's descendants. The wrath of God, the beginning of the day of judgment. It is as if it is going to be the beginning of the day of judgment. Everything was conquered, especially China, parts of Middle East and Europe. So that was what was done by Genghis Khan. We have a lot of questions that we have to answer in this particular chapter. How did the Mongols create an empire that dwarfed, that brought down the achievements of the other world conquerors, especially that of Alexander? Alexander was a great emperor, right? But that dwarfed, or it kind of reduced the achievements of all these world conquerors in front of Genghis Khan. And it was a time when there was no technological communication. In a pre-industrial age this happened. You should remember that. What were the skills that were used by the Mongols to administer and control such a vast dominion? Because no technology was there, and it was during a time of pre-industrial age. So self-confidence was also there. We have to be aware of his moral, divinely dispensed right to rule. He was so self-confident. How did he relate to the diverse? Because he was really, you can say that he was very rigid sometimes. But how did he easily relate to the diverse social and religious groups that comprised his dome? How was he able to actually rule people from different social and cultural groups? Because ruling your own people itself is difficult. So is it very easy to rule people from other cultural and social dominions? That is a question. Is the making of his imperium, that is his empire, what happened to this plurality? It was a great empire which was made, city which was seen in his empire. So these are the questions that we have to consider in this particular chapter, and all interesting questions will have to be considered.